Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Slice of Film podcast, where today we're going to be taking a slice out of Driving Miss Daisy. I'm your host, Katie Ghostrap, and with me today I have Landon Beall, who was so kind to come back after I lost the recording of the first time we got this episode done. So, Landon, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I was happy to come back because number 1, Driving Miss Daisy. Number 2, Driving Miss Daisy. And number 3, Driving Miss Daisy. So it was a win-win.
It's good to talk to you. So I'm super glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, it's always good to talk about my favorite film. And some people are like, why is that your favorite film? I'm like, because it's Driving Miss Daisy.
Well, today we're just going to kind of jump straight into it. But before we hit the review of Driving Miss Daisy, I do want to just kind of hit all the high points. We are part of the Geek Ultimate Alliance Podcast Network. Find that network on Twitter at GUA Pod Network. You can find this podcast at Slice of Film 1 on Twitter as well. Where we've got a podcast every day of the week. We've got Marvel and DC Monday and Tuesday, respectively. We've got our comics podcast, World's Finest True Believers, on Wednesdays. And on Thursdays, of course, you can find me every week. Bi-weekly is this podcast. And then the opposite week is my podcast, Star Wars Alliance. And then on Fridays, you have our animation show with Greg and Travis. Every show is hosted by a great group of people. So I'm really excited. If there's something else that interests you on this, you can find us every day here of the week. So yeah, go check us out. I'll leave all the links in the description box below. Landon, why don't you go ahead and say where they can find you on the social medias?
I am on Twitter at the Bellman. That's Beall because my ancestors couldn't spell. I'm also at Storybake HQ on Twitter. I have a YouTube channel called Storybake. Storybake is transitioning into being kind of a podcast slowly. Current events in the world have kind of slowed that project down a little bit, but it is coming eventually. So if you want to keep in touch with that, check out the YouTube channel, Storybake. And I'm also on Instagram at Storybake, and the website is storybake.net.
Make sure y'all go check those out because he does a really great job interpreting stories. He did a lot of great things with Star Wars in particular. So always my favorite topic to discuss. But today, Driving Miss Daisy. Landon, why don't you give us a little summary on the film just so people know what we're talking about?
Cool. So, Driving Miss Daisy is a Academy Award-winning film about a lady who she basically crashes her car and she can no longer drive, so she needs a chauffeur. Her son hires a chauffeur named Hoke, and she and Hoke clash. It takes place during the Civil Rights era, and Miss Daisy is a Jewish woman, so she fancies herself as not prejudiced, and that's where a lot of the conflict between her and Hoke come from. The other conflict comes from age and the fact that they are both people who are advanced in years. So she fancies herself as somebody who doesn't need a chauffeur. Hoke fancies himself as someone who just needs a job, needs her to cooperate, and you get this back and forth between them. And over time, their relationship matures and develops. They develop a friendship for each other, and they also start to confront their biases with each other. And it's a very beautiful and well thought out story. It's not a story that shies away from the atrocities of the era, but it's not the center stage either. The center stage is these two people and the world that they live in and how they navigate it. And it's a wonderful film. People, I think, are very surprised whenever I tell them it's my favorite movie. because I'm very much a sci-fi guy. I like Star Trek. I do like Star Wars, but I'm very much a Star Trek guy. Uh, I like high science fiction. Denis Villeneuve, Joseph Kosinski, and when I tell people, "Oh, Drive Miss Daisy," I think it takes people a second to really get that I'm serious. Uh, but that film, I grew up with it, and it still speaks to me in so many ways, and I think it's a wonderful film.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it talks a lot about just like the focus is the relationship between the two, and it's really interesting to see it grow kind of between, not between, but, along the timeline of, I think it's what, 25 years? Yeah, somewhere
Yeah.
in that range. So, and it's just, you see her go from this brusque old lady, and she's still brusque at the end of it, but like she calls him her best friend and everything. Oh, before we get any further, we will be talking about spoilers. So just keep that in mind, guys. So if you haven't seen the movie, go see it. Or if you want to keep listening. But definitely just be forewarned. Anyways. um no, and I thought Jessica Tandy and Morgan Freeman do a great job in this role. And when we talked about it originally, I didn't know that there was like a play involved. So, like, this is based on the play. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the original Driving Miss Daisy, Alfred Uri's the gentleman who wrote it. Uh, he wrote it as a stage play, and that's how it existed for years. And if you've ever seen clips of a production, like there's a popular one that PBS did, and it's got James Earl Jones and what's her name? Murder She Wrote, Mrs. Potts.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Her name is escaping me. Well, now that's just embarrassing. But anyways, yeah, they did a version for PBS, and
Angela Lansbury.
Yes, I don't know why I couldn't think of her last name. But yes, James Earl Jones and Angela Lansbury, they did this version for PBS, and something that people will notice in that and most stage productions is that they use very minimal sets. They don't use lots of sets. It's mostly just the actors on the stage doing the work. Mm-hmm. And the movie's very much the same way. Yes, there are sets because the sets are necessary for the style of a film, but the sets aren't really, they're not center stage. They kind of are used to reflect the passage of time. Like over time, the car that Hoke drives changes to a newer version. The house gets older that Miss Daisy lives in. Their TV upgrades to a color TV. It little subtle things along the ways that don't happen so much in the stage version. But really, I feel like when they adapted it to film, they really allowed the medium of film to make the movie what it is. Because if it was just people talking, it'd be a boring movie.
Yeah.
But it really feels like a vibrant film, and Hans Zimmer actually did the score for this movie.
That's what I just realized. It's something that's quite out of his usual norm, I would think. And granted, this movie's a lot older, so this could have been his beginning and jumping into the sci-fi action world afterwards. But that's really interesting that he did the score for this.
Yeah, I actually was reading about it, and he did the entire score for Driving Miss Daisy on his own with a keyboard. He didn't have a big orchestra, behind him to score that film, and that's one reason I feel like it's very unique. Like the music doesn't really feel of the era. It just feels like its own thing. Mm-hmm. And it helps to tell the story. And I love soundtracks that do that.
Yeah, it definitely remains kind of in the background, but helps progress the story. you talked about the costume design and like the age. One thing I noticed when I first watched this movie is like it's really, if you're focused on the two actors, it can be hard. Like I didn't realize the time was actually passing in the years mark until probably the Martin Luther King Jr. Speech scene. Um, because it's just like I was so focused on the conversation between Hoke and Miss Daisy. Like and I should have been paying more attention to the scene, but when you look back at it, yeah, you can definitely tell with the newer cars and everything, that time's changing. And then obviously Bully's hair changes every time he's in the scene.
Yeah, his hair changes. His face gets older because he's the younger one, so he's actually aging.
Yeah,
visibly aging. The other two they're already older, so it's subtle changes. Like over time, Miss Daisy's hair gets a little bit longer.
yeah,
and Hoke, he gets a little bit grayer, and his glasses, the glasses lenses get a little bit thicker. So it's little subtle changes over time as they're aging. Because when it starts out, I mean, Hoke's already, they kind of imply that he's already like in his 60s.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. It says he's gosh. Yeah, it was like early 60s.
Yeah. And so Miss Daisy is probably about maybe a couple years older than him or something.
It says 72 for her.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And it's also nice. Like people talk about when you advance in age, and people talk about ageism and stuff like that. This is a movie that doesn't really care about that. Like this movie says, hey, there's stories to tell about people who are aging, and it's nice to watch how, yes, their opinions don't really change. That's something that happens as you get older. Your opinions don't change as much. And I think that in a normal movie that wasn't of this type of structure, the characters would have more dramatic character changes. But really, the villain of the movie is racism. It's the culture of the time that they live in. So they're not like at enmity with each other. They're at enmity with the culture they live in. And so it's very gradual changes over time. Like, Miss Daisy doesn't fancy herself to be prejudiced because she's Jewish, but then it turns out she is. And it's because of the culture that she lives in. And she doesn't realize that, there's prejudice against her because she's Jewish until her church is bombed.
Yep.
And then Hoke has to see, coming into her home every day, the way that she just kind of snaps at him all the time. He has to see, his friends and the people in his circles, the way that they react to Miss Daisy and her family. There's one scene where Idella passes and they go to the church, and it's Hoke's church, and Miss Daisy, Booley and his wife, they're the only white people in the entire building.
Yep.
So it's just it's little things like that start telling the story of how these two characters navigated that world and then grew to mutually respect each other. And like at the end of the film, Miss Daisy tells Hoke that he's her best friend because after a certain point, he wasn't just her chauffeur. He was the kind of person who they both had each other's back. She taught him how to read. He drove her around. And yes, Hoke was paid to do that, but she wasn't paying him to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that some people get hung up on with the film is like, oh, well, he was actually paid to do it. Yeah, but he wasn't paid by her.
And that's kind of the point of contention that starts off the film is like that Bully pays Hoke to do it, and Miss Daisy's like, no, I can do this. Like, I don't need anyone to do it. And obviously, she finally accedes to the agreement, but ultimately it was. I lost my train of thought already. Dang.
Well, it's definitely a point of contention because from the get-go, she really hates that her son is paying somebody else to be at her house. She hates it. And
Yeah.
even later on in the film, it's kind of a point of contention because it comes up, how much he's paying Hoke, and she thinks that it's not enough. Or at one point she thinks it's too much, and then at another point she thinks it's not enough.
Yeah.
So the fact that Hoke is being paid to be her chauffeur is always kind of like this point of contention for her, because she doesn't feel like she needs to have a chauffeur paid for her.
Yeah. And I think you can this film's even more applicable right now with what's going on, but you kind of just see the inherent bias that kind of creeps in. You said the racism was just kind of ingrained in the culture, and I think this is a perfect film to watch for someone who quite doesn't understand that, and so can look at it through the eyes of someone else. I mean, you see, she doesn't claim herself to be racist, but then calls him out for stealing a can of tuna.
Oh
And
yeah. Oh,
so
the can of salmon scene. I love that. That's one of my
yeah.
favorite scenes in the whole film because it's built up to be so dramatic, and then Booley's like, "You called me over here for a 33-cent can of salmon."
Yeah.
He's like, "I'll write you a check, buy you a whole pantry full of salmon." And she's like, "It's not." She's like, "I don't care about that. That's not the point." And then Hook comes in and he's bought a can of salmon for her, and Booley just leaves.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
But it's stuff like that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like you said, that's the built-in prejudice where she's just looking for things to get rid of him.
Yeah. And then so like the trip to Alabama when she kind of realizes that I think it's the cop scene. And she doesn't necessarily understand it. I think that's kind of the turning point in the film where she realizes that okay, yes, along with the synagogue, but just the trip to Alabama is kind of the turning point where they reach the barrier of driver and rider and kind of start to become more friends from there. Would you?
I definitely agree with that. And the cop stop, I really feel like that's used in the film to show that the prejudice across the South is different in different places.
Yeah.
At least in that era, because Georgia, that area of Georgia was a little more modernized. You had people from the North and the South who both worked there, and it was just it was a little less segregated. But then you start moving into Mississippi, Alabama. It's a very different. It's a very more in your face racism. And that's what you saw during the traffic stop, and also when they stopped at the one place that didn't have a college restroom, and it was kind of implied like it was like a KKK meeting place.
Yeah.
So Hoke is driving, and he's just like, "I gotta go make water," and she's like, "Well, you can stop somewhere else," and he's like, "No, I can't." And she's like, "Yes, you can," and he starts acting like he's gonna keep going. He's like, "No," he's like, "I'm a grown man," and he pulls over and he goes behind the sign, and she's scared. She finds herself scared being alone at night, in the middle of Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And you see two things there. Number one, she's scared. Number two, Hoke is just like, I'm not gonna take your lip over this.
Yeah.
He's like, I know what I have to deal with in this world. He's like, I'm gonna go.
And that's one of it.
Yeah, no, he's like, he might as well have said, I know what I have to deal with every day. I'm going, to relieve myself.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It's sad that that's the world that existed. And people talk about this movie like it's a feel-good movie, and there are feel-good parts of it. There's parts that make you laugh. There's parts that are enjoyable. But it's more a movie that's supposed to make you feel and think. It's not feel-good in the respect of, oh, I feel so warm and fuzzy when it's over. It's a feeling that makes you sad that that's the world that existed, and a world that even in the modern day today we never fully took care of and dealt with.
Yeah.
And the temple bombing is one example. Even little things like at the beginning of the movie when Hoke's first introduced, and he knows Oscar caught in the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the characters, I don't remember which one of them it is, but one of them kind of acts like, oh, you're black, so you know every other black person.
Yeah.
And it's the little tiny things that this story and this movie seeks to capture with racism. It's not overt. And I think that's why some people don't quite get Driving Miss Daisy, because they're used to movies like Selma. Selma is a fantastic film, and it deals with overt racism. 12 Years a Slave, a movie that deals with overt racism. Driving Miss Daisy doesn't deal with the overt, it deals with everyday racism.
Yeah, it deals with the little ingrained parts. And I think Hoke as a character kind of represents a lot of things, especially with the patience he takes to kind of not necessarily wean Miss Daisy off of racism, but just kind of get her to think differently about it.
Yeah, and it's not like he forces her. It's more like the little subtle things. Like he suggests at one point that it's not bad for her to act like she has money, but she's immediately offended because she feels like that makes her look rich. But to him, coming from not a lot, she kind of is rich.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of a pushback there. And then also, like, later in the movie, you see where they clash a little bit over, as Miss Daisy's views are starting to change, and she wants to go to this Martin Luther King speech, and she wants Hoke to go with her, but she won't even ask him because she just assumes, oh, you're black, you'll go with me. It's, again, the film is very good with dealing with the little everyday racism that we don't take the time to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why, as a kid, the movie really spoke to me. Like, I really watched the movie and I enjoyed it because they have good banter. And then as I got a little bit older, and I watched it all through my youth, it wasn't just a one-time thing. But as I got a little bit older, I really got to see the genius behind this movie. And again, that's just yet another reason why it's my favorite.
Yeah, it definitely is one that you want to kind of go back and watch multiple times to really pick up on everything. And Miss Daisy, like she says in one scene, I don't remember which one, but this was something like I took a note on specifically, that she says things have changed, and then Hoke responds like, no, not that much. And so it's like it takes the look of the race relations in the South and through the years, and it says, oh, okay, from my perspective, things have changed, but from this other perspective, things haven't changed that much. And I mean, clearly they haven't based on what's happening today.
Right. Well, I mean, on the plus side, things are better than they were during the civil rights era. I'll give it that.
Yes, things are better, but
but like you're saying, it's telling because you see little things here and there.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ways that we talk about people and not immediately presume their humanity. It's the way that we presume things about people because of how they look and where we think they came from, and not by talking to them and seeing how they think and how they feel and where they grew up. And it's something we all do. We all have inherent biases. We have biases about people who look like us and people who don't look like us. And uh, the fact that there is still a world here that we live in where people have to be concerned when they are stopped by the police, and people have to be concerned when they go out to the store with their families because they don't know what'll happen. Driving Miss Daisy is a movie that shows those little things, just inserted here and there, just little things. The cop stop is one example, but it gives you time to think about yourself. And these are just two people, and for them the outcome ended well. But the world they lived in, kind of like you said, it really didn't change all that much. They made it through the civil rights era throughout the film, but it didn't change all that much the world around them. What changed was them.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, for the culture we live in now, we can't count on the culture to change. We have to change ourselves.
And I think that's one thing, especially looking back on this film, like from the first time I watched it, one of the things I've always said is that you can't untrain bad learnings from when you grew up. Like, people are taught to be racist, and like, especially the bad ones, people are taught like certain things when they grow up. But I think this movie inherently represents something that says, okay, you can unlearn those things to an extent. And so that definitely has changed my way of saying, okay, maybe you can speak to these people, but you have to come through it with good intentions. Like, Hope never had any, how do I want to, Hope to me never seemed like the patience he showed made it seem, God, what's the right word?
It's more his personality. It's not really that he's intentionally showing patience to Miss Daisy in particular.
Yeah.
It's more his personality. It's like his negotiating tactic.
Yeah, you have to come through it with that same tactic. Like, it's, yeah.
And different actors play that differently too. James Earl Jones in the version he did with Angela Lansbury, James Earl Jones plays Hoke a little more confrontational. There's a scene in the movie and in the play where Hoke gets a better job offer to go drive for I believe it's a judge's wife, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they went to a party or something, and
so he got a really good job offer, much better than he already had. He goes to Booley about it, and he's telling him about the amount, and he's kind of getting really with him. Like in the movie, Morgan Freeman's just kind of soft spoken about it, kind of chill about it. But James Earl Jones is just like very matter of fact, confrontational. He's like, yes, this is how much I'm being offered. And so they start negotiating price. Well, he gets a better price from Booley for the same job to keep driving Miss Daisy. And once he's done being confrontational, he just kind of laughs about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a role that gives you flexibility as an actor, but even like you said, there's still that patience about him. He has a level of patience to him even if somebody's playing him as a confrontational fella. And in our world that we live in right now, I've used this as a recent example. I didn't know till I was about 16 years old that the Confederate flag had anything to do with anything racist or overtly racist. I grew up
same.
Yeah, I grew up in East Tennessee, a part of Tennessee that stayed in the Union during the Civil War. So everybody around here just said it's part of, it's a symbol of the South, is usually what people would say. And I had no idea, and I was confronted about it as a teenager by somebody from Georgia. And as soon as I was confronted about it, I was like, that doesn't sound right. That's not what I was taught. And then I started listening to people. I started talking to more people and started reading on the history of that symbol. And that symbol is not just a symbol of the South. That symbol is a symbol of overt racism towards one group of people.
Yeah.
And those are the ways we change. Those are the ways we say, hey, you know what? That was wrong. I was taught wrong when I was younger. I learned this when I was younger, but I'm an adult now. I can think for myself, and I have the capacity to learn and change. And it's always good to keep that in mind about other people, because right now we are living in a time where we want people to change, but the natural human tendency is to feel like someone's calling you out or somebody's attacking you. And Driving Miss Daisy shows, I feel like, the ways that people gradually change over time, and kind of some of the right ways to go about that.
Yeah, and people change over the course of years. Like, I know I'm not the same person I was when I first got on Twitter in high school. Like, I'm a year removed from college right now. Like, I can guarantee you I'm not the same person I was then. Like, and especially with how much cancel culture plays into effect here, I think Driving Miss Daisy definitely shows you've got to give people a chance to grow, and sometimes that takes a long time. But in other cases, sometimes it can take a span of months. It can take a span of a week, where I thought very differently in May, where I think now, based on what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, I've done more research. I've learned. I would not have said the same things that I've said about this movie if at the beginning of May. Like,
yeah.
It definitely can cause you to think differently and do your own research. But sometimes that can be a matter of having just a positive person in your life that says, maybe you should think about this a different way. And I think that's the best representative quality here, is that Hook doesn't overtly say, no, this has to change. He just allows it to change. So,
and what I've learned from talking to other people, listening to other people, is if you really want in the modern world to get to know how somebody is, and I mean anybody from any group. It doesn't necessarily have to be a racial group. It can be any person from any walk of life. If you want to get to know somebody and you want to get to judge them for who they are and not some idea of who they are, you got to talk to those people. You got to engage with those people. And you got to be willing to say when you were wrong about something with those people, because that's the only way to learn, and the only way to change is to meet people where they are and grow and love people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I also realized that social media doesn't represent everyone on the planet. So that's one thing that I've had to have a good think about, is that when I find someone on social media, like I mean, Landon, you and I have never met in person,
Mm-hmm.
but like you don't learn about people from their social media posts. You learn about them by talking to them, like you said. So sometimes you just have to take that conversation away from social media and say, hey, like, let's have a call. Let's have a text chat or something that pulls it away from a public eye, because sometimes people act differently in the public eye, and maybe that's not the best thing. But I think definitely Miss Daisy acts a lot different in her house in the later parts of the movie than she does in public. And it definitely takes that Martin Luther King Jr. speech to make her realize that.
Yeah. Well, and you very much see that even in the earlier parts of the film. She kind of treats Idella just like, an underling. And she kind of approaches her relationship with Hoke the same way. And her relationship with Idella doesn't change. It's static through the whole film. After she dies, though, I think she's forced to sort of re-examine her relationship with Hoke. And it gives her a chance to start seeing, places she can change. And like you said, with the Martin Luther King speech, the assumption that she started out with is that Hoke would go with her because he is black. He was going to see a prominent black speaker. But Hoke wouldn't have none of that. He was very offended by the fact that she wouldn't ask. And rightfully so, because that level of assumption would be like someone assuming that, I don't know, that I want biscuits and gravy and pancakes and bacon because I'm a white guy from Tennessee.
Yeah.
It's basically the same level of assumption. And maybe I wanted a hamburger, maybe I wanted broccoli casserole.
So broccoli casserole, man.
Exactly. And so it's the little things. And again, I could talk about this movie for hours, but I feel like the true sheer brilliance of Driving Miss Daisy is the fact that it presents people, and it presents the flaws that people have, where we assume things about people when we shouldn't, and why that's wrong, and why so much of what the racism is that we see today is because we don't talk to people. We don't allow ourselves the capacity to understand somebody who looks different than us, or lives a little bit different than us, or has a different home life than us. We have a very, and I think some of this is human. We have the tendency to congregate to people just like us, the way they think, the way they act, the way they talk, the foods they eat, what they drive, how much money they have. And because racism is something that it was an economic crisis for people, a health crisis for people, and still is, that almost created subcultures of people.
Yeah.
And we didn't take the time as a culture to fix those things and then associate with people who ultimately are just like us. And nowadays, again, things are better, but the thing about life is that if something's not quite where it should be, we're all adults. We can see that, and we're seeing that in our culture now.
Yeah.
And the goal is for things to change and things to be better, and for it to be a revolution, because I want to live in a world where my black friends and brothers and sisters are able to go through a drive-through at night and not have to worry if they're going to be pulled over by a cop, because I'm able to do that, and I want that same world for them too.
Yeah.
That got deep all of a sudden.
It did. And I feel the same way as you, but you're just a lot more eloquent than I ever be. So I don't know. Do you have another? I know you said the can of salmon scene was one of your favorites. Do you have another favorite scene in this?
Second favorite scene. Wow, that's hard. All of them. Okay, if I had to pick maybe 3 scenes, can of salmon scene for sure. I like the scene. Oh, I gotta think. This is hard.
Oh, I've actually stumped him.
Yeah,
It's
because I
new.
like them all. I mean, I can pretty much quote Driving Miss Daisy from beginning to end. I really like the scene where Idella passes because, well, it's kind of like a sequence. It's not really one scene, but it's a sequence where you get to see like how all the characters are reacting. I really love the scene where Hoke takes Miss Daisy to the Piggly Wiggly.
Yeah, that's another good one I forgot about. Like just seeing just that's another good one where her reaction changes. Like he goes and like uses the phone call to tell Bully,
Yeah.
"Oh, I actually got her in a car."
I
And
love that he goes over. Well, first of all, Miss Daisy complains.
yeah,
First thing complains because she doesn't think he's going the right way. But he
backseat
pulls.
driver.
Yeah, she's the ultimate backseat driver. um, but he gets her there faster than she would have gotten her there. Pulls up to the door, lets her out, and Hoke goes over to the phone booth and gives Booley a call, and he's like, yeah, I finally got her out, and he's like, only took me 6 days, same number of days it took the Lord to make the world.
Yep.
And that scene is awesome, and also just another good example of the scenery too. The side building of the Piggly Wiggly, they redid that facade for the movie, so those colors on, I think it's a Coca-Cola banner. It's just nice and vibrant, and it makes you feel like you're back in that time.
Yeah.
And that scene, yeah, I'd say those 3 scenes are probably top 3.
Cool.
Maybe top 3. I also like the one where they're at the cemetery, and Miss Daisy's trying to point Hoke over to the Bauer headstone, and he has to admit that he can't read.
Yeah.
It's a very vulnerable scene for both of them. And I really like the one where Hoke goes and gets Miss Daisy coffee.
Yeah.
From Krispy Kreme during the blizzard. So.
And she's like, "Well, you didn't have to do this."
Yeah. Then Booley calls and is worried about her and is shocked that Hoke got over there to her. But yeah, I'd say those are, among my top scenes. But we're already up to like what, 6 or 7 scenes. This is the problem.
Yeah.
I like the whole film. There's not a bad scene in the movie.
That's always a good thing, though.
It is.
So this film, I'm looking this up. It had a pretty good critical reaction. It has an 81% on Rotten Tomatoes. It had 9 Academy Award nominations and achieved the following distinctions in Oscar history. It is the only film based on a off-Broadway production ever to win Best Picture. Jessica Tandy was the oldest winner to win Best Actress. It is the first Best Picture winner since 1932 to not also receive a Best Director nomination. It would be the last Best Picture winner to be rated PG.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people. I don't really feel like it did deserve a Best Director nomination. It's not a director-centric film.
It's definitely not.
I do feel like Morgan Freeman deserved Best Actor.
Yeah, he was nominated.
I believe he definitely deserved that, but I can also understand why he didn't get it because there was some competition that year.
Yeah.
The story itself, it's watertight.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one reason why there's so many good scenes, because it is watertight from start to finish.
Yeah, it won the best screenplay based on material from another medium. So that's definitely an indication. But I would agree, it's a very watertight script. It knows what it's doing. It knows what it has to take. The other thing that it does really well is, I think, one, the makeup's fantastic, and then the cinematography, it definitely makes it feel not necessarily like an older film, but like it's a comforting look to the cinematography, like the colors and everything in it. It's all very good.
Yeah, it's got a very warm tone. It feels like you're constantly in the sunshine. And the film grain, this is one film where the film grain really makes it pop. This film would not be the same if it was shot on digital.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm not one of those people who's digital to film purist, but there are certain films that are better because they're on film, and Driving Miss Daisy is one of them for sure.
Yeah. Was there anything else you'd like to touch on?
If I wanted to keep touching on Driving Miss Daisy, I'd be here for 3 hours.
I've got to go mow my grass though, so um so on that note, we'll take a quick break for an ad. Unfortunately, we don't get to pick who the ad person is or how loud it is, so listeners, just be prepared.
Listener discretion is advised.
Not necessary discretion, but just turn down the volume on your headphones, y'all. We appreciate the support, and we'll be right back. Thanks for listening to Idea. I appreciate the support. And so now we're going to transition to the last portion of the show. What 3 films have you watched recently, and would you recommend or not? We do not spoil these films. So if you haven't seen one of them, you should not have to feel like you have to skip ahead or anything. So with that, Landon, lead us off.
All right. So the 3 most recent films I've seen, I'm going to start with the oldest I've seen on all the way up to the newest, in sequence of when I saw them, not when they were made. So third most recent film I saw was Steel Magnolias, which I hadn't seen in quite a while, but my wife really loves that film. It's in her top 5. So we cracked it out, and it was really good. It had been plenty of years since I'd seen it, but Julia Roberts is great in it. Dolly Parton's great in it. It's got a very much what's the term? Star-studded cast. It's got a star-studded cast, and it's pretty good. So if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while, give it a check out again. I also saw Zombieland Double Tap, which was probably a little bit more violent than I expected.
Yeah, it's an interesting film.
Well, the first one's violent, and it's a good film. I guess I didn't think that the second one would be more violent, but it was, and it's also great. It's really funny, and I liked it almost as much as the first one. So bravo, Ruben Fletcher, director of Venom. Can't go wrong. And then the most recent film I saw was Grease. And it is the word. I had only ever seen it one other time when I was younger. The other times I had tuned in was when I was listening to the soundtrack. But it was great. We got to go to a drive-in theater, which I know, shocker. But it was nice to be able to go to the theater again and see a movie on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie Grease is a little bit corny, just a little bit by today's standards, but that also gives it a lot of charm. So I would definitely recommend.
And I don't remember, did you say you recommend Steel Magnolias?
Yes, I recommend all three. All three of them are
Cool.
recommends. They're good films.
I haven't seen Steel Magnolias, so maybe I'll have to put that on my list. So my 3 films that I have seen most recently, number 1 is Logan, directed by James Mangold. It's the last movie we see Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman. I was like, man, I love this guy, but I can't remember his name. And that's not a spoiler because it was revealed beforehand, but it's a great movie. It makes me even more excited to see James Mangold direct Indiana Jones 5. Definitely recommend, though you do need a lot of background to see this one, I feel like, and especially to have the emotional attachment. So definitely 10 out of 10 would recommend. The next one on my list is The Rise of Skywalker, the controversial ending to the Skywalker saga. Number 1, I definitely think this is a good film. I don't think I will leave the link to several descriptions. I did 2 reviews on this and a podcast on this where you can hear my full thoughts. But I love this movie. I think it does a lot of great work in it. Directed by J.J. Abrams. So I would recommend only if you're in a Star Wars mood, though, and it does require a lot of background context. The latest one I've seen is Artemis Fowl, which is on Disney Plus right now. The Rise of Skywalker is also on Disney Plus, but Artemis Fowl, and that's really the only good thing I can say about it. I think if you've got kids, this would be a great one to turn on and let them watch. Thinking from that context, because this one's based on a book from 2001, and it does a lot of good things. It's not the worst book to film adaptation I've ever seen. Is it the best though? No. So it kind of depends on if you've got kids or not. I think if you've got kids, it's a great movie to turn on and watch. If it's just you though, or just a group of adults, there's definitely a lot of better things you can see on Disney Plus right now. So
yeah, don't show any of these movies to kids. Maybe Grandpappy Palps. I don't know. I guess you could show Grandpappy Palps to kids. He would probably scare them to death. But aside from that, yeah, don't show any of these movies to kids.
Yeah.
Show your kids Driving Miss Daisy instead.
Yes, definitely. I think you could show them Zombieland 1. I don't know about Zombieland 2.
You could maybe show them the TV edit to Zombieland 1, yeah.
That's true. I forget that you have to edit things for TV. I've been without cable for so long.
Yeah, the OG cut, it's definitely R-rated, but it's mostly just language and a little bit of violence. So you could probably show the first Zombieland to kids if you weren't too worried about it. The second one is not for kids at all.
No.
Not even
no. So I think that's all we have for today. Or did you have something else? Sorry.
No, that's pretty much all I had. We covered a lot of ground, and I know I talked a lot, but thank you for having me on. I got on my soapbox a little bit, but recent political events have definitely made me feel things. So.
Definitely, and I agree with a lot of stuff you said, and you've said it a lot better than I could have any day of the week. So thank you for coming on, because I know one thing that I've tried to do is I've tried to find the words to speak my opinion on this, and I've just decided to just listen a lot more instead of just talking. And so I think based on what I've listened to, You've said a lot of good points, and I agree with everything. So, thank you for being here.
No, you're welcome, and it was good being here. And the only reason I feel like talking now, I spent a good 3 weeks, I guess, 2-3 weeks, however long we're into this, where I didn't say anything because I wanted other people to be heard first, and then finally I did speak up because, opinions change on the issue of racial equality and justice. That's something where my opinion hasn't really changed. The only thing that's changed for me is really just the level that we as a society have to confront it. And I definitely feel like we as a society, we can't afford to just confront it the way we have before, where we say it's wrong. We have to confront it and say it's wrong. Here's what we're going to do about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot more people are starting to see that way, and I think gradually we're going to start to see some change. But you gotta keep your foot on the gas. Can't let your foot off the gas until we start to see that. So,
I know my university. So we changed the honors college back in 1982 to Calhoun Honors College, and Tillman Hall was changed from Old Main to Tillman Hall, I think around the same time. But yesterday they changed Calhoun Honors College back to its original title of Clemson University Honors College, and they've requested from our General Assembly to be allowed to change Tillman Hall because it's protected under the Heritage Act right now, the name is. So, but it's kind of just reverting things back to the old names that they had. So it's a lot of good steps for my university in particular, but I hope we followed up with more. So
yeah. Well, and like I said while we were talking about the movie, what I want is I want that world where everybody can live their lives the same way and not fear for their lives.
Yep.
You should be able to go out to any grocery store or any establishment you want and not have to second guess whether or not it's going to be safe for you.
Yep.
Beyond what everybody has to do normally. Everybody has to wage. Is it safe to go out after 11 o'clock at night?
Yeah.
The old adage. So yes, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if it's 8 or 9.
You shouldn't have to worry about being out.
No, or regardless of what it is, most of these incidences we hear in the news happen in broad daylight.
Yeah.
And I hope we see the end of that because humanity's better than that, and our brothers and sisters out there are people who shouldn't have to worry. We're all Americans, and we need that better society.
Yeah. So, on that note, why don't you tell us again where you can find us where they can find you on social media, Landon?
All right, you can find me on Twitter at kgillstrap13 and at sliceoffilm1. That's SLICE because my cook couldn't spell. And you can also find me at the Guapod Network.
Now tell us where they can really find you, Landon.
Okay, yeah, you can really find me at the Bellman on Twitter. That's BEALL. And you can also find me at Storybake HQ on Twitter, Storybake on Instagram, and on YouTube, and the website is storybake.net.
Awesome. You can find me on Twitter at kgillstrap13. You can find this podcast on Twitter as well at sliceoffilm1. The Geek Ultimate Alliance Podcast Network is at GUA Pod Network on Twitter as well. You can find this podcast on all of your favorite podcatchers. If we're not there, then just let me know and we'll make it happen. And then you can also find us on YouTube. So go make sure you listen. If you'd like, give us a review. Let us know if there's anything we can improve on. I take all constructive criticism very, very well. So just let me know. If after this one goes live, I will be posting a poll on the Slice of Film Twitter to say which movie you want me to hit next. We have a couple options. We have Aliens, Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, and Terminator are going to be the options for episode 4. So let me know which ones you want to see next. If you want to come on for a movie talk, let's make it happen. Slide into the Slice of Film DMs. But on that note, thanks for taking a slice out of Driving Miss Daisy with me and Landon, and have a good day or night, whatever time of day you're listening. And we'll see y'all next time. Bye, guys.